We cannot give rings to men. The risk of corruption is simply too great.
Spoiler alert. In the second season of The Lord of the Rings of Power, Celebrimbor finished the 9 rings for men, preparing their distribution to those destined to fall under Sauron's sway. With the exception of Sauron's One Ring, which would eventually rule over them all, these formidable pieces of jewelry are the last to be created as the eponymous Rings of Power.
You shall not find them here. They will be far from your reach by now.
Now that their creation is complete, Prime Video's series can focus on their effects on Middle-earth, including the gradual suffering of those who wear them and their final transformation into the terrifying ring wraiths from The Lord of the Rings. Celebrimbor created the Three Elven Rings first, in Season 1, in the Middle-earth time frame shown in Rings of Power, and they were given to their wearers early in Season 2.
The rings. Show them to me.
We dare not use them, High King.
Following Celebrimbor's deception by Sauron, the Dwarven Rings were created and gifted to Durin's people in Khazad-dûm, who then dispersed them throughout the other dwarf nations. The 9 rings for men eventually arrived and each severely damaged Celebrimbor. By the time they were finished, Eregion and its king had virtually collapsed, but Sauron had planned this entire thing in Rings of Power.
Finish the 9, and I will spare your city.
Welcome to Movie Spy. How and why the Rings of Power and the 9 rings for men are made in Lotor. Sauron has a special scheme for the works of Celebrimbor. The 19 Rings of Power created in Eregion were all meant for elves, according to the canon of The Lord of the Rings, but Sauron stole 16 of them and gave 7 to the dwarves and 9 to the men.
For our third forging, we will make 9.
But Rings of Power took a slightly different approach to this tale. According to this version of the story, the 7 and 9 were created specifically to be gifts to these various Middle-earthian races. As Anatar, Sauron persuaded Celebrimbor that men who had bestowed upon their race stars such as Beren, Tuor, and the half-elf Arendil were also deserving of these magnificent rings.
We cannot give rings to men.
Of course, Celebrimbor was unaware that Sauron planned to subjugate great monarchs of men, such as the Númenóreans, through the power of the 9.
We identify 9 ring bearers of the 9 greatest mortal kingdoms.
In Rings of Power Season 2, he went on to say that this was for their own benefit and would help Middle-earth achieve a great and long-lasting peace. Sauron's ultimate objective is always dominance and control, though. Ultimately, by creating an illusion that made the black substance seem like ground mithril, Sauron managed to fool Celebrimbor into creating the 9 out of his own blood.
Requires sacrifice.
This will undoubtedly have a negative effect in the future on individuals who wear the Rings of Power. What abilities the 9 rings provide? The powers of men will explode for the men who wear them Rings of Power. Regarding the kinds of powers and skills the 9 bestowed on their wearers, Tolkien did not go into great depth. The 9 wearers' lives were prolonged, presumably providing them immortality, and they possessed the ability to turn invisible. It is also hinted that the 9 let men amass wealth for their kingdoms, just like the 7 Dwarven Rings did. Though the Prime Video series will surely expand on the qualities the 9 provide their wearers, this would certainly appeal to a lot of lords and kings in Rings of Power. Given that people in Númenor have grown to despise immortals like Galadriel, it is conceivable that Sauron will offer his gifts as a means of allowing men to enjoy eternity with the elves. 3 of the 9 were bestowed by Sauron upon Númenórean kings, according to the canon. Therefore, it is probable that Rings of Power has already featured at least one of the recipients. Given that Tolkien never disclosed the identities of the 9 recipients, these will probably be some of the original characters from Prime Video, like Kemen, the son of Pharazôn. How the Lord of the Rings 9 rings transform their wearers. There will be an even more severe down spiral. King Durin III from Rings of Power has already shown how the Rings of Sauron can alter the wearers. Durin has been avaricious, intent on doing nothing except adding to Khazad-dûm's fortune. Naturally, his choices will bring about the downfall of his kingdom. The 9 will undoubtedly experience the same thing, but with some notable exceptions. According to Tolkien, Sauron was unable to completely subdue the dwarves because they were resistant to their rings. Conversely, men made much easier prey. They will become blind and hungry from the Nine, but Sauron will have complete power over them once he creates his One Ring. Why the Nine turn into ghosts? The recipients of Sauron's gifts will eventually turn into ringwraiths in Lodor. Sauron's power over the Nine increased in significance after he fashioned his One Ring. The wearer's adoration for the Dark Lord and corruption increased until their own life essence was united with their masters. They became known as the Ringwraiths, or Nazgul, when their bodies disappeared into the Wraith world and were only seen by those wearing rings. The Nine had lost track of their names and past lives by now. All they knew was that they served as Sauron's warriors. The Nazgul vanished along with the Dark Lord when he lost his One Ring and his authority in Middle-earth. The Ringwraiths could not reappear in Middle-earth and begin their quest for the One Ring until Sauron's might started to increase once more. Their invisible bodies took on shape from their cloaks, and their only concern was Sauron's desire. In The Lord of the Rings, where are the 9 rings for men? There is a debate about the fate of the 9. Tolkien devotees vigorously discuss where the 9 rings for men are by the events of Lord of the Rings. The 9 were still wearing their rings on their fingers when Gandalf declared before the Council of Elrond that they were with the Nazgul. Later on, though, it is said that Sauron holds the 9, suggesting that he returned them. This has given rise to the theory that Sauron needed the 9 to subdue the Ringwraiths in the absence of his One Ring. But this would not have been necessary, given how inextricably linked their own being was to the Dark Lord. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo also has the power to sense rings of power. It is mentioned that, despite most people's inability to perceive Nenya on Galadriel's finger, he was aware that she wore it. It is possible that the Ringwraiths were wearing the 9 even if Frodo was unaware of them. Either way, it is clear that in The Lord of the Rings, Sauron or the Ringwraiths are where the 9 rings for men were, which is essentially the same thing. Naturally, the events in Rings of Power take place far later in the history of Middle-earth. Thanks for watching.